Pre-recorded. This is the Red Ticket Blues Podcast. I am Brian Buckley. This is being recorded on January 13th to hit the internets on January 14th. Remember, you can always listen to the show on iTunes, TuneIn, Radio, Stitcher, and YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13 and at Red Ticket Blues. Today on Thursday Talk, a personal favorite of mine throughout the years since I was a kid, Mr. Steve Summers from WFAN, a sports talk show host there who really needs no introduction. And in fact, because of that, I'm not even going to give an introduction. Let's get to the interview. All right, as promised, for the last 20 years, I've heard this guest voice in the car, at work, in my headphones on my bike, and anywhere else. It is truly an honor to have WFAN sports talk show host Steve Summers on the podcast. Mr. Summers, welcome to the Red Ticket Blues Podcast.
Well, Brian, I would say the same. I'm honored as well to be on with you. It's very flattering. I'm very honored that you asked me, so I think I will have a little bit of fun.
Absolutely. So, Steve, let's start here. Now, you're a San Francisco guy, but
yes.
you've always had your sights set at being a New York sportscaster.
Yes.
What was behind the drive to cover sports all the way on the other side of the country?
Well, to me, New York, and it still is, the beginning and the end of the world. It was, there are three kinds of New Yorkers, Brian: the native, the commuter, and then the person who sees New York as a destination, as a goal, as a dream. And if you were to look at my high school yearbook, it says under my graduation picture, among all the things that I did in high school, valedictorian, baseball, basketball, all the things like that, it says ambition, New York broadcaster. And so this was a dream, and, if you take an airplane from, say, California to New York, it's about 5.5 or 6 hours. That flight took me 22 years.
Now, before you landed in New York, you became sort of and before you became a quintessential radio guy, you were a TV sports anchor in California.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you're right, and I did radio too. I actually started with radio when I was still a teenager, about 18, and in San Francisco. And then there was I worked at 2 or 3 radio stations, very small, and I was a kid, and I was cheap, and they didn't have to pay me anything, and I still don't get paid too much. But the bottom line is that I started out doing radio, and even started with the Fearless Forecaster on a top 40 radio station, in which he made predictions on Fearless did on high school football games, because it was a top 40 radio station. It played, music that teenagers and college kids listened to, and they decided to hire me to do high school sports. And I covered Dan Fouts, and I covered Mike Holmgren. In fact, when I had Dan Fouts on the other day, who, was covering with Ian Eagle the Jets games here in New York for CBS, we had him on the Fan, and when I welcomed Fouts to the program, and this wasn't the first time he had done this, but when we welcomed him to the program, he asked me, how's Fearless doing? So he remembers from his high school days what Fearless was saying on the radio about his football team, and usually predicting his football team to lose. But I did start in San Francisco doing radio, and then got into television in San Francisco, then to Sacramento, then to Atlanta, then to LA, and then eventually here in New York. It seemed like I never was going to be hired to do TV. In New York, the opportunity came, and I got lucky when I got hired, and I was the very last hire at WFAN back in July of 1987, when they were thinking, Brian, about doing an overnight talk show that had never been done before with any kind of radio station doing sports, that's for sure. There had never been a 24-hour, around-the-clock sports radio station, number one, and so nobody had ever done an overnight show, and I was their last hire. They were thinking either they would have somebody live overnight, or they would repeat daytime programming overnight, or they would bring in syndicated programming overnight. And the agent that I had at the time convinced them, and so did I, to give me the chance we would make it work. And of course I had no idea if it would work or not. You never know what, the audience is going to think of you. You do what you do and hope that it works, and hope that by being yourself, it can attract an audience, and you can, have some stability with a job. And so I was the very last hire. They eventually decided to have a live person overnight, and eventually, after 10 years of doing it, Don Imus had called it the best overnight radio program he had ever heard.
That radio program obviously encompasses your voice, your iconic voice. I mean, in a New York Times piece written a few years ago, you were quoted as saying, "I don't think I have a good voice."
I don't, Brian.
So a legion of schmooze fans begs the question.
Yeah, no, I know.
What do you like about it?
Yeah, nasal, raspy, not the typical deep voice with your balls hanging all the way down to the floor, sounding as if you're speaking from Carlsbad Cavern or the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The real deep John Sterling has that kind of voice, for example. And there are other guys at WFAN who have very deep voices. I really don't, but, I'm glad it works for me. The other day we did, when Mike Piazza was inducted into the Hall of Fame, we had Johnny Bench on, the great catcher, Hall of Famer from Cincinnati, as you know, Brian. And we recorded it because you couldn't do it when I was on the air that evening. So we recorded it in the afternoon. I could not hear the playback when it played on the air because I didn't want to hear the sound of my voice.
There are two other legends in the history of entertainment that didn't like their voice either. So Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix. So I think you're in good company there. Oh,
I really am. Two old hippies.
So maybe you can bang out a little All Along the Watchtower, make it a troika?
I like that a lot. Well, just like a Rolling Stone, I would be.
I mentioned your legions of fans you have. They'll tell you that what makes your show distinct is that it's more than just a talk show. It's a performance, especially taking into consideration your monologues. With that being said, how do you prepare for your radio performance every night?
Well, that's a great question, Brian. Sometimes it takes me 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes me 4 hours. Before, joining you today, I was working on a monologue for later on tonight. Because Evan Roberts is such a big Nets fan, they're having him at 6:30 this evening when the Nets are playing the New York Knickerbockers. They're having Evan over at the Barclays Center work 6:30 to 7:15 before the game. Right. So this evening I won't be on until after the Knickerbockers and the Nets game, and so I'm having I'm very relaxed today, not feeling the deadline, not feeling any sense of urgency to get this monologue that I'm working on now done for 6:30 because I won't be on until about 10:30 or so later on tonight. So I have all day and early evening to work on the monologue, and I'm working on it because I'm trying to do something related to the movie Concussion, in which I'm putting together a sequel called Concussion 2. And I'm not going to tell you any much more about my movie, which is all audio, of course. I do have a production guy working right now on putting the elements of this movie together so that later on tonight we could all hear the trailer. But the bottom line is I'm very fortunate that my thinking or creativity, I guess is the right word, does work, because nobody else really does what I do, and they're probably very happy about that, and maybe the audience as well. But I'm a little bit different than everybody else, and fortunately, the audience of WFAN can accept somebody who's a little bit different than everybody else.
How do you judge your performances every night? Because from what I've read and heard, you can be your biggest critic.
Oh, I am. Yeah, very, very often I come home at night not as happy as I could be. There are some nights when you feel like $1 million, and there are other nights when you feel like if you could offer a refund on what you were doing, you would do that. No, and I think that check and balance system is very healthy. I don't want to come in and say, you know what, I've been here 28 years, all I have to do is sit down and start talking, and magic is going to happen. It doesn't work that way. I'm not as bad as I used to be, because you feel more accepted, and you feel more of what you are doing is working and has worked in the past. Otherwise, I would be in the unemployment line. But the bottom line is that, no, I care a great deal about what I do. I don't take myself very seriously, but I do take my work seriously.
You've been a sports talk show host pre and post internet. I've spoken to some sports talk show hosts, and their preparation involves getting a bunch of web pages up as the show's going on to, that's how I get my information. Has the World Wide Web influenced the way you prepare and conduct your show?
Oh, not really. I mean, in this way, it gives me more information, obviously. I mean, it could ignite an idea. There's just so much information out there, and my thinking is the more information you have about everything, the better off you are. And I use so many metaphors, whether it's as I just have been alluding to the movie, making some kind. I mean, whatever it may be, I love to use alliterations and metaphors from real life into the toy department, which of course is sports. So the bottom line is, I think the more you know about things, you can't know everything. And in fact, there's a lot more I don't know than do. But I think with information, whether it's from the front page or the back page or any pages in between, the more you know about things, the more you're more better off, and the more you feel confident that whatever it is you are going to be doing on a given day, that you can get it done as best you can.
Besides the monologue, some of the best parts of your show have to do with your interactions with the callers. Many sports talk show hosts barely let the callers make a point. Your philosophy is slightly different. So my question is, what effect do callers truly have on the outcome of the success of a show? Or does it really come down to managing the callers themselves?
Well, I think it's a little bit. That's a good question also. It's a little bit of both. They're like my co-host. Mm-hmm. I'm not with another person. I'm not Boomer and Carton, and I'm not like with Joe and Evan, and Mike does it solo, and I do it solo. But I love taking calls because I don't feel I'm any different than they are. I'm really a fan who realized a dream a long, long time ago and have been able to make a career out of it. And I realize, Brian, and believe me, this is not false humility here. You have to be lucky. And I think I've been probably more lucky than good in my lifetime, in that I'm so lucky to be doing what I'm doing. I think the real talent sometimes in this business is not necessarily being yourself on the radio or TV or whatever it may be in any of the performing arts. I think the real talent is making it happen and then holding on to what you made happen. So I think talent is really relative, because you, Brian, are just as talented as I am, and given the opportunity...
I wouldn't go that far.
Oh, yeah, I would. I would, because you might be just as successful. You might be more successful. And there's always that dream and always that opportunity. And there's no reason to think that you and your approach or your presentation would be any better or worse than mine, because you never can figure out the audience. If programmers could ever figure out what the audience wants or what the audience needs, I mean, people would never be fired. People would never be hired. So it's an ever-changing, transient business in which the real talent to me is getting the opportunity. And eventually, Brian, your number, like my number, coming up, your number will come up, as will somebody else's. The scary part is that you just don't know when.
You know, taking all that into consideration, luck, talent, opportunity, you put this into, obviously, a long career at WFAN, and it shows your ability to work in different areas. Is you've sort of run the gamut with all the different time slots you work. And
yeah, you're right about that. And yet the most fun I had was overnight, because it was new. It was fresh. I was discovering myself, discovering my style. Everything was like a small baby contemplating fingers and toes for the first time. By the time you're an adult, you don't even think about your fingers and the toes. But as a kid, when you realize that you can do things that you've never done before, it's a revelation, it's an enlightenment. And that's what the overnight show was for me a long time ago, when everything was new and everything was young and everything was fresh and it was working. Whether it was the monologues, whether it was the production pieces, whether it was talking to callers, I didn't even realize that it was having the impact that it was having, but now I do, of course. But then I used to think that the only people listening were the people that were on the telephone line.
Now, obviously you've worked both day and night. Is there, if someone asked you, what is the main difference between the day audience and the night audience, what do you think you'd say?
That's also a good question. The night audience is mostly home. And mostly at bedtime. Now, it's a different audience during the day. You're going to have people on the move, people coming and going to work, driving around. Maybe some homemakers, whether they be women and men or men. But at night, you have just a different audience for the most part. People who are either working late, who are up late, people who are home getting ready for bed, maybe after television, putting on the radio to get the latest, information or entertainment after, watching late night TV, whatever it may be. But you have more of a workforce audience during the day, and that workforce is home at night.
We know all those callers, whether it's day or night, you treat the callers like family, you've said in the past. And, I mean, yeah, there are the recent callers right now, like a Ralph in Manhattan or Simon in Yonkers, but there have to be a few over the years overall that really stick out to you.
Yeah, there have been, and I think some of them have passed away, from 28 years ago. I didn't know anybody when I came here. It was exciting. It was a new world. I had no family here. I had no friends here. I didn't know anyone. I didn't even know anyone at the radio station when it first started. And, that most of those people that I was meeting were working during the day. I was the only one, a late-night engineer, late-night producer, one or two people in the newsroom. That was it. Everybody else with the radio station, I didn't know. So the callers did become friends. And there are, to this day, Brian, a number of callers that I had way back at the very beginning that I call friends today, people that I see, that I talk to, that I've gone to games with, broken bread with. So I wanted to make friends when I came here, and they didn't know me, and the audience didn't know me. I didn't know them, but I was determined to let them know that I was so happy, so lucky, and so grateful to be given the opportunity. I even said on the very first night that I worked that if I get fired from this job, it won't be because I'm not going to try. And, from that point on, and I repeated that, maybe over the first year or two, and then I realized it was working and doing okay, and people were calling up and saying, you're pretty good. And, I used to call my mother and my father when they were alive, and I would tell them, I don't think that I'm going to get fired tomorrow or the next day, maybe next week. I don't know, but I think it's working and I think it's okay. And finally, I was making them proud.
I hear this question asked all the time on the internet or just in passing with people mentioning a caller. Now, I believe you've said in the past, but I just want to confirm this, that Jerome in Manhattan is one of those callers that's unfortunately passed away. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't have official confirmation, but we think he has.
Okay.
He wasn't in good health when he was calling.
Right.
So, I used to hear from a cousin of his, and I don't hear from her anymore. So I just don't think. I hope he is alive, and I hope he is okay, but he might be in a facility. I'm not really sure. I have no information at all. I'm only guessing that he might have passed away because I know he wasn't in the best of health, and, things were never that good, even when he was calling on a regular basis. So I really don't have any information about him, but there are regulars that we have, and, Ira from Staten Island and Joe from Staten Island and, Ralph, as you pointed out, from Manhattan. And, there are regulars who call all the various shows, including mine. But the callers in the very beginning that I don't hear from anymore, that may have passed away. There was a Dominic from the Hunts Point Market in the Bronx, and because I'm the son of a grocer and because he was in the grocery business, he once brought down 19 cases of fruits and vegetables for me to spread out to the people that were working overnight. 19 boxes.
That's a lot of vegetables.
Yeah, sure, for the son of a grocer. And there was a Martin from Flushing, and as I say, Dominic from the Hunts Point Market in the Bronx, and a Vinny from Queens, and they were great callers. And John Andres, who used to work with Marv Albert on the Knickerbocker broadcast way back when the station started, and before Mike and the Mad Dog, before Imus, John Andres used to say real sports fans were listening to me late at night, and I took that as a compliment, and probably was the very first personality on WFAN to make a difference.
Speaking of personalities, and that being personality that, occasionally joins you, perhaps your most famous caller, Jerry from Queens, that being Mr. Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry's been a part of the show on occasion throughout the years, and especially with the Mets playoff run recently, or World Series run. How'd you guys hook up?
Well, one Saturday night, about 1990, I'm home alone, wasn't married then as I am now. I was watching Saturday Night Live, and it was in July. It was very hot. And when the show was over, about 1:30 in the morning, right down the block, I took a walk. to the bodega, to the deli on the corner to get some ice cream. And, it was about 1:45 or so. I had a pair of sweatpants on, a T-shirt, wearing a Mets hat, and wearing some sneakers with no socks, because I had been in bed watching Saturday Night Live, so I, just put myself together to get out of the apartment and walk down the block to the store to get the pint of ice cream, and I see two guys in the store, nobody else other than the guy behind the counter. And there's two guys, one a black fellow and the other a white fellow. And I kind of do a double take. And one of the guys, the black fellow I didn't recognize at all. And the other guy was wearing a Met hat also. And I found out later that they had been to Catch a Rising Star, which was an Upper East Side comedy club that's no longer here. And it was right around the corner from where I live. So Seinfeld and George Wallace was the black fellow, another comedian, and to this day, a very good friend of Seinfeld. And they had gone to see, comedians at Catch a Rising Star, and then left to go and buy cereal at the deli. Well, anyway, I'm over where the ice cream is, and I do a double take with the guy wearing the Met hat. Kind of looks familiar. So I realize it's Seinfeld. Now, his show really wasn't on the air yet. He and Larry David at that time were like putting it together. But I recognized him from Johnny Carson and, late night TV and I had seen him in person doing stand-up. And so, it was Seinfeld. And so I walked over to him and I said, I was very nervous, and I took my card out, which I don't even have cards now, but I had a card that said I was with WFAN, had my name on it, the whole thing. And I said, excuse me, I don't mean to be rude. I just want to say hello. I'm a fan of yours. He never made eye contact. He was looking at the cereal on the shelves, never made eye contact, but he took my card. He looked at the card, never making eye contact yet. I've already said, hello, don't mean to be rude, just want to say I'm a fan, just want to say hello. He looks at my card and then looks at me, and right in the eye, and he says, "You're Steve Summers? I listen to you every night." I couldn't believe it. I almost screamed.
That's great. Jerry, you're talking Jerry, talking Hollywood. Now, I watched a movie the other day. Great movie. It's an older movie from 1979. It's called The Visitor. Have you ever heard of this film?
Is that not the worst movie you've ever seen?
I actually did not see the movie, but I did see the clip of you, of course, as you were a part of that movie. I went on YouTube and you were announcing, I'm not sure if it was a Hawks game specifically or it was a basketball game.
Yeah, it was at the Omni in Atlanta, because I did TV in Atlanta at one time in the 70s, and the director of the movie, who didn't speak English, an Italian director, was making a movie, and 1979 was not long after The Exorcist came out, and that came out in 1973. So The Exorcist was so popular that there were a lot of spin-offs, a lot of bad movies having to do with the devil and possession and exorcism. And so this movie was just awful, with some girl with oversized sunglasses sitting in the stands making the basketball explode as the team she did not want to see win, about to win with a dunk. And she makes the Omni explode, the whole thing. And it really is funny. It's just an awful, awful movie, but at the time, the people that were in the movie were very well known. There was a Glenn Ford, John Huston, Shelley Winters, and Lance Hendrickson, a very young Lance Hendrickson. He's been in a lot of Rambo movies, Terminator movies, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, with Sylvester Stallone. He's been in a lot of bad movies, but he's been a working actor, and I had to do an interview with him in the movie, and they paid me $400, to do this. The director had seen me on TV in his hotel room, just having the channel that I was working for on in his hotel room. And he thought, okay, this is the guy we could use to do some play-by-play and do an interview with Lance Henriksen, who was playing Ted Turner, a Ted Turner type. And that's how that movie and me got together. But it was that movie played about 2 minutes in theaters before it was just thrown away. But in the very beginning of my working at WFAN, I actually played some of the audio from that movie, having fun with that movie and making fun at that movie.
So that's great to hear. It's not going to be on my list to watch with the way you described that.
Oh no, it's
blowing up basketballs and.
No, it's awful. Not even well done. But it's a spin-off from The Exorcist.
So finally, Steve, WFAN is approaching 30 years of existence. What do you think has made WFAN, and you specifically, successful for that long?
Luck, and well, no, that seriously, I don't want that to sound like false humility. In the very beginning, WFAN, nobody thought it was going to last, let alone any individuals who were on the air. They were thinking the concept wasn't working. It took a few years for the radio station to really get its legs under itself. But if it was going to work anywhere, it was going to work in New York, where you have the best fans and the best teams and the passion and the knowledge, and you're a great example of that, Brian. So with people like you here, the station found itself, and people found WFAN, and the rest is radio and New York and sports history and American popular culture history as well, because it's the first of its kind. And as you know, Brian, now all over the country there are, one or two all sports radio stations just about everywhere. So, again, if you were to talk to 10 different people on why one guy is still there or successful, you'd probably get 10 different answers. For myself, I think a lot of it is luck. I've worked hard. I have a cousin, and she said to me, Stephen, you were just due, because the career had been a little shaky and a little bit rocky and a little bit unstable before coming to New York. I always say, in New York, people say, if you make it here, you can make it anywhere. I couldn't make it anywhere else, but I made it here.
That's great. Steve Summers, I want to thank you for coming on the Red Ticket Blues podcast. But before you go, to play us out, I have 3 quick questions for you. You ready?
You got it.
All right. Where exactly does the name schmooze come from?
Well, it's a Yiddish word for idle chatter. And one night, way back in the beginning, about 2:30, 2:45 in the morning, I said, we're schmoozing the SPORTS. And that's just stuck. People started calling up saying with the schmooze and schmoozing, and I was going to drop it, but the audience at the time wouldn't let me.
All right. Who is the most polarizing New York sports figure since you started at WFAN?
Polarizing? I'm not sure I understand, Brian.
Okay, who's the most that's made the most noise, the most calls that you've gotten throughout all the years?
Oh, I see. I got it. Well, I would say Patrick Ewing, Darryl Strawberry, and Mark Messier, because of what he did in '94. But definitely in the history of the station, Darryl Strawberry, I would say Patrick Ewing, and then I would say Mark Messier. Those 3.
Okay. And finally, what is your favorite Seinfeld episode?
Well, the whole, there are so many. I don't think we have the time. But certainly anything that had to do with sports and Keith Hernandez, so that ought to give you a clue.
There you go. There you go. He is the iconic WFAN sports talk show host, Steve Summers. You have a Twitter name. You have a Twitter account, but you don't really handle it, though, do you?
Oh, right, I don't. It's my producers that handle it. They tell me that it has quite a following.
Oh, it
I
certainly
don't think I've ever read any of my own tweets.
You can follow him on Twitter at Steve Summers, WFAN. Steve, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
An honor and a pleasure for me, my good friend, and I hope we have a chance to do it again someday.
That's Steve Summers. What else can you say other than that's Steve Summers? It was amazing to do. It was a lot of fun, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. It's Steve Summers. What else can you say? You can listen to this podcast over and over again and all the other podcasts of the Red Ticket Blues podcast on iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at BrianBuck13 and at Red Ticket Blues. Like us on Facebook, and remember to subscribe and review the show. It's greatly appreciated. So with all of that being said, I'm out of here.